This is the one-pager ICMR STS proposal writing guidance document that the STS website shares. We have looked at it in the previous session and we realized this is what Shiladitya was asking, that the word limit for each of those parts or sections of the proposal. So our proposal has STS reference ID. We looked at this in the last session. This is the recap. So STS reference ID, title, introduction, objectives, methodology, implications, and references. And we look at the word counts there. What we realize is the most words are associated with the methodology section. Introduction section also has substantial word count, and the references also take a lot of word count. But then references is something which will be auto-populated. So as you identify different references, you don't really need to create anything there. But methodology and introduction is something which you have to write on your own. Right? So we have to compose the introduction and methodology. The references probably would get automatically added there in the manuscript as we select them, insert them. So methodology and implication is something which we'll keep on talking in the next sessions. For rest of the points we are going to cover in today's session. So we'll start with the STS reference ID. I will direct you to some resources that we have shared on the Google Classroom. So I will request you to go, at least there are two sample protocols, the entire protocols, including the annexures, possible annexures. So they are probably running into multiple pages and it is in the PDF document. So Shiladitya, if you can look at those sample protocols which are available in PDF document, that would give you some idea as to what's the length of the document, how many pages it usually the STS protocol goes into, and how the word count is distributed across the different sections. There is also a blank template in the Google Classroom provided, which is Microsoft Word document. We keep on updating the blank document. So as we update, we'll notify on WhatsApp and Google Classroom as well. We have also uploaded a checklist. So the checklist gives some few checklist points or indicators. Once you are done with writing one particular part of the protocol, you can revisit the protocol, keeping in mind the questions which are there in the checklist. So we are going to discuss that a little bit towards the end. So these are some of the resources. You can look at previous protocols, use a blank template, and once you are done with creating a primary draft, you can use a checklist to refine it further. So we start with the first part of study proposal. So as you start writing the study proposal in your Microsoft Word document, this is how your Word document might look like. So you write the reference ID. So this year the reference ID will start with the year 2026, and you might have your 5th digit, the reference ID. Then there will be title and introduction. So what are the guidelines around reference IDs is that you are not expected to write any identifying information, only reference ID to relate that this protocol belongs to you. And do not put your name or any other contact details, not even the name of medical college. So ensure that the identifying details are not there anywhere in the protocol. So STS allows only the name of the district and name of the state in the entire protocol. So then the next part is writing the title. So during the previous two sessions, we have taken examples of multiple studies and looked at multiple titles. What we realize is that the ICMR allows only maximum 25 words for the title. So the title has to be short and concise. And in fact, 25 words is good enough for us to convey everything that our study is all about. When you frame the title, ensure that it reflects the study population and study variable, what you are interested in, what exactly does your study report about and among whom. If you can insert your study design also into the title, saying that, so for example, a cross-sectional study. We earlier took an example that the knowledge of first aid among the adult residents of a village on the first aid practices in case of snake bite, a cross-sectional study. So a cross-sectional study could be either towards, usually people keep it towards the end, right? So that's how the title would go. Another important advice regarding the title is that currently what you start with is a working title. So as you go forward, preparing the entire proposal document, you will gain better and better clarity. So as you meet your guide multiple times, as you keep revising your proposal before submitting, your clarity would increase around what exactly are you going to research on. In fact, your title would, it's high chances that your title would keep on revising, right? So right now, don't be forced to select the perfect title. Your title would get refined as you move along. And your current title might not be the one that you would go into the final submission document. Right? So it will keep on revising. Introduction is an important part. So in the previous session, we have talked about, when we talked about review of literature, we talked about what is the flow of introduction. So probably divided into 4 parts. First, you introduce the topic where we say that you talk about the concept and the numbers. Then you share a little more, go a little refined, go a little more narrower about what exactly are you interested in. So what's already known about that particular topic? What's the lacuna in existing knowledge? So previous researchers, what they have not done or what they have indicated that now the next research should be focused on that particular aspect. And what do you really wish to focus upon in this research? Now, how introduction and objectives, objective is going to come on the next slide. How introduction and objective would be different would be, in the next slide, where you write objectives, you can directly write the exact objectives. And objectives have to be very meticulous. The wording we use there have to be very meticulous. Your introduction can really end with the study aim. In the objective, you can directly start with the specific objectives. We recollect during the last session, we said that aim is something which is an umbrella term. Your aim could be one, but your objectives could be more than one. So this last section of the introduction where we say that what we want to focus upon, this last section where you want to focus upon, probably your aim could be written here as last part of your introduction. Now, if you come down to some of the guidelines, so once you have framed a draft version of your introduction, we understand that it might not be perfect, but these are some of the points which will make it a little better. So ensure that information is logically organized. It goes from broad to specific. Ensure that the text is split into paragraphs. So at least we expect minimum 3 paragraphs and maximum 6. Don't make it more than 6. So when you write for the first time, you might write multiple sentences together, and you might realize that your paragraphs are going into multiple lines. So it would be just fine to, let's say, have each paragraph not having more than 4 or 5 lines. Also ensure that as part of what's already known about the topic, you might have cited previous similar studies. So when you cite previous similar studies, always paraphrase the language. So you will probably be picking up findings from the study results or from the conclusion section of those previous studies. Paraphrase those sentences. The language has to go in one reading flow. So when someone reads your introduction, there should be a language flow in your introduction, right? It should not appear that you have copy pasted sentences from different studies and then look disjointed. Ensure that references are placed at places where it is necessary, and ensure that information presented is in simple language, right? So since it's scientific literature, many a time use of scientific terminologies would be allowed and expected, but you are also expected to keep it very simple. So the other day I was talking to one student who was thinking about, say for example, the waist circumference for measurement of obesity. Now, waist circumference for measurement of obesity is a very specific term. Now, when you look at the previous literature around that particular topic, you have, you would have gained substantial clarity as to what waist circumference means. But you need to, in simple terms, explain also, if that's your major objective or that's the major thing that you are interested in. Assume that the reviewer who is going to review and decide whether your STS application is accepted or not accepted, assume that that particular reviewer is not a subject expert. So present it in a simple language. So the core components of your study variables have to be explained in a simple term, right? And finally, your first draft might have introduction which is running more than 300 words. ICMR STS guideline says that you can take a leeway up to 100 more words, so make it 400 as well. But we would advise that your introduction should be less than what you have written in methodology. Usually, it ends up that many students write very lengthy introduction, and their introduction section is in fact lengthier than the methodology, and it should be reversed. Since your methodology allowed word count is also 800, so an introduction should be shorter. You are expected to do more details in the methodology. Now, when we think of the relative word count between introduction and methodology, please understand that your reviewer is interested in what you are intending to do. So, between your introduction and methodology, understand in introduction, you are building a case why you should be doing this study. So, you are saying what others have done and what I intend to do, right? In methodology, you actually explain how are you going to do the study. So imagine if you were the reviewer, you would obviously be interested in finding out how that particular researcher is going to do the study rather than what the researcher is summarizing previous literature. So nobody is usually that much interested in going through a lengthy summary of what's the previous research around that. Only a short summary which builds up the case, justifies the rationale is good enough, and hence the shorter word count for the introduction. Right? So that's the introduction, the first part which anybody reads, right? So ensure that it is interesting, ensure that it is simple. We move to the objectives then. In the last section, when we talked about refining a research topic, we talked about important elements. And the important elements were that our research topic should be something which is relevant. So we say that if it fits into ICMR priority areas, it would be good. It should be something which is specific and focused. And the third part are elements of identifying what is our study variables, what is our study population would help us make it more focused. And the third element was it should be reasonably feasible. Who the reviewer should find that an first or second MBA student in the span of next 2-3 years should be able to do this, right? So those are our study objectives. Now, how many objectives can be there? In fact, one objective is also fine, but most of the students go on with more than one objective. So when you are dealing with more than one objective, it is important to identify something as a primary objective. Probably your sample size calculation as you move forward in methodology would depend on your primary objective. Ideally, we say that the sample size has to be calculated for all objectives. But if you are not calculating for all, at least for your primary objective, your sample size calculation would depend on. The guidelines says that you can use maximum 100 words to describe your objectives, but you need not have to stretch the 100 words. So it's not necessary that your objective section has to have 100 words. If you can reasonably and clearly communicate your study objectives within 50 words, within 60 words, that's also completely fine. Right? So now we are taking some of the examples to understand. So we identified 3 important elements of a study objective. First element is an action word. Second element is the study variable. And the third element is the study population. So we had talked about study variable and study population in the earlier sessions. So today we are focusing, so assuming that the students have a reasonable amount of clarity on those topics, today we are going to share a little about what are the action verbs that we use in objectives. So in scientific research, usually certain kind of action verbs are preferred, right? And certain kind of action words are usually not preferred. The action verbs are which little vague are not preferred. So imagine, so in this slide and the next slide, we are taking some examples to understand what action verbs are recommended. So imagine that you are doing your study among a single group of study participants. You are not dealing with more than one group, right? So if your study variable is to be measured in numbers, So, for example, this first study where each patient who presents in the emergency room, uh, someone is trying to find out time taken from symptom onset to arrival at the emergency room. So, it's a time duration. So, duration could be, it's in minutes. So, for some patient, it is 30 minutes, some other patient, it might be 120 minutes, another patient, it might be 180 minutes, and so on. Right? So, they are numbers in minutes. So a better action word for such objective would be to estimate, let's say they have preferred to summarize it in terms of median time taken for this particular event. So to estimate median time taken from symptom onset to arrival in the emergency room. So to estimate would be a preferred action word. Now the study variable of interest might not be measured in numbers and you might measure it in terms of proportions. So for example, you are interested in only single proportion. So we took this study where the proportion of villagers who can correctly identify a poisonous snake was to be identified. So here there are only two categories: those who could correctly identify, those who could not correctly identify. So in this case, it might be estimate the proportion who could correctly identify. When it is proportion, you might have more than one categories as well. So think of the next two examples where we say the causes of death. Now the causes of death might be multiple, right? So, and you might not say that I'm interested in only one particular category. I'm trying to find out what's the percentage with each of those categories. So in which case, to identify the various causes of deaths might be a good action word. Or, so for example, we took earlier took the example of health problems faced by transgender people. So the health problems faced by them might be many, right? And we are trying to find out what are the common health problems. So probably we'll enlist the health problems as part of the study findings and give proportions. That health problem A was faced by 50%, health problem B was faced by 20%, and so on. So in this case, to identify would be a good action word. Now we take another example where instead of one group, you're dealing with two groups, right? So there would usually be two scenarios where you will be dealing with two groups. Either you are trying to find out association between two variables. So say for example, association between two important things. So first example says that my thinking ability, my cognitive impairment, and type 2 diabetes, or maybe my sugar levels into type 2 diabetes mellitus. So when I'm trying to find out an association and say that people who have good cognitive ability, how is their blood sugar versus people who do not have good cognitive ability, how is their blood sugar, right? So then I'll say that I'm trying to find out the action verb is to determine the association between these two variables. Or we take another example where we try and see what's the association between serum lithium level and hearing capacity. So we say that when the serum lithium level is high, is the hearing capacity high or low? So we once again use the action verb determine. Sometimes we might just have two groups to compare with. So, for example, we have two groups. We took example of dengue, and within the city there were two groups of neighborhoods. One neighborhood having high dengue prevalence, the another neighborhood having low prevalence, and these are the two geographic areas where we are trying to find out uh, the plastic segregation practices. So we are trying to compare the plastic segregation practices among high and low dengue prevalence geographies. Right? So we use the action word compare. You might be doing only studying within single group, but you might be trying to find out the effect of something. So usually in ICMR STS, clinical trials are not allowed, so you cannot do drug trials. But sometimes the students are giving health education to, let's say, individuals, or health education to families in hospital settings or in community settings, and those kind of studies are allowed, right? So when the student is giving some kind of a health education, the student would probably measure their knowledge levels before and after giving the education. So in this scenario also, you can use the action word to compare. So to compare complementary feeding practices of mothers with children before and after individualized nutritional counseling. So these are some preferred action words. We would request the students choosing their action words from this list. There are some words to avoid, which are a little vague, which are more which are open to wider interpretations. Right? They do not have specific meanings. right? So avoid using the word to study, right? It is fine or okay to use the word to study in the aim, but not in objectives. To evaluate, even to describe, is little vague. So, say for example, if I say that to describe the common health problems faced by transgender people, it would be better to use the action verb to identify common health problems for transgender people. Identify means that you come out with a list. To describe means you come out with a paragraph. In research, usually in quantitative research, we do not intend to come out with a paragraph of our findings. We wish to come out with a list and probably numbers associated. Right? If our study is qualitative in nature, if our study involves qualitative methods, then probably a better action verb, it's not there on the slides, but a better action verb would be to use the action verb explore. So, say for example, we earlier used a qualitative study which was on the doctor's perception about reporting of adverse events with medical devices. So, in that case, to explore the doctor's perception about use of about the reporting of adverse events following use of medical devices. To use the word explore would be fine in qualitative studies. So that was with regard to the study objectives. So we talked about the reference ID, how the title can be, a little bit on introduction and the objective.